much. All right, is that thing on and ready to go? Hello, LibertyCon. This is my favorite convention that I go to every single year. We've got student activists that come here from all around the world and advocating for our ideas in places that are a little less friendly sometimes than things can be here in the United States. I will admit to living in the Washington, D.C. bubble and enjoying all of its different comforts, and we have it incredibly good here. And what Students for Liberty activists and organizers are doing all around the world is what reminds me all the time that this is the good fight. So thank you so much for being here and taking the time to stay all the way through Sunday and hear this talk. We all come to this movement for different reasons. We have different points of entry. I've always felt like a little bit of a weirdo in that I didn't read Hayek or Rand until I was at least 30. I still haven't even seen Milton Friedman's Free to Choose, God forbid, and I was not involved in SFL in college. I didn't know that it existed. I really wish that I had, because I just felt like a lost and confused Republican. You know, I didn't belong and fit in with the college GOP kids. I didn't get along with the college Democrats either, and I knew why. It's because we all learn liberty in different places, through different formats. The ideas of the Enlightenment and reason and spontaneous order, trying to think of another great concept, but these things are seeded throughout the popular culture. We pick them up in movies, books, televisions, and more. And for me, I feel as though I learned at the age of 13 about the forces of darkness and order versus chaos and the will to power and the corrupting influence of power from this man, Boromir, Steward of Gondor. Yes, applaud for Boromir. He gave his life. I learned a lot from watching this guy, Boromir, Steward of Gondor. He really wanted to fight back against the forces of darkness that were going to consume his kingdom. And it got the best of him in the end. Now, in my teens, I was not reading political theory. I was not really super interested in politics. I was very interested in these movies. I was watching the Lord of the Rings movies and what was happening in Middle-earth with incredible interest. The forces of darkness that were rising out of Mordor that were going to overtake Middle-earth, and they posed a threat to destroy liberty for the men, the elves, the goblins, the hobbits, and the dwarves. It was a threat to everybody. And when I was watching those movies, I started to become a little bit more of a believer in all of the things that we now talk about today. But in Middle-earth, there's this one ring, this one tool that promises you the power to be able to stop that rising tide of darkness. The One Ring. I even got it for this. If you have the ring, you're going to be able to supposedly have the power, or at least think that you have the power, to stop those things from happening, to be able to push back on it. And then when I think back on the conversations that were being had in those college GOP and Democrat meetings, it was very much about the ring. We were talking about winning elections. We were talking about changing laws. We were talking about owning the libs or finding a way to push back on the Republicans and the conservatives. It was about power at its core, and I just really wasn't interested in that. You see this very much in American politics today. It's a conversation that's picked up a lot of steam. It's already overtaken most of Europe and parts of South America, this populist tide, where we know that the progressives love the ring. They're very transparent about that. I almost respect it. And then you have conservatives and libertarians who we've always kind of had a tepid agreement, or at least for the past couple of decades, that the ring was dangerous and that maybe it should not be wielded because it might one day be wielded against you. But in recent years, the conservatives, our friends a little bit further to the right, have gotten a little bit nervous with the state of the culture and society, and they are now starting to have a very different conversation amongst themselves. They feel that small government philosophy has maybe come to betray them, right? That the other side is going to be using government power, and their values are not holding up in the court of public opinion, and virtue and liberty and all the things that we tend to care about might not survive on its own unless you use a little bit of healthy force. They are now having the exact conversation that Boromir wanted to have in Rivendell when he said, why not use the ring and use it against them? And I empathize with that. I really, really do. There are things in the culture and in the world that I am afraid of and I do not want to see be normalized or be sanctioned by any government. And I empathize with Boromir. Again, like even in the moment when he tries to kill Frodo at the end of the first movie and take the ring from him, he says, I ask only for the strength to defend my people. Noble impulse, right? Like that's a noble and worthwhile instinct taken to a dark place. And earlier in the movie, you have Gandalf, who is offered the ring by Frodo. He doesn't want to take the quest to Mordor, and he says, don't tempt me, because he would like the ring too. I would use the ring from a desire to do good, but through me, it would wield a power too great and terrible to imagine. I love that line, because it's this reminder that you may have plans for how to use power, but power has plans for how to use you, right? Power is its own sort of force that you have to be able to control over time. Now, you might find this surprising because the battle over the super weapon of government is something that just continues generation over generation. And super weapons are important, right? This is my favorite super weapon. I've always wanted one. I'm a little bit more of a Star Wars fan, a lot more of a Star Wars fan than I am a Lord of the Rings fan. I am the author of How the Force Can Fix the World, Lessons on Life, Liberty, and Happiness from a Galaxy Far, Far Away. It's very much like Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, except it's about the economics of slavery on Tatooine and the fall of the Jedi Order. So it's something that you should pick up. I actually have a couple free copies here if you want to grab one before they're gone. And in my book, I look at the impact that the Death Star had on the galaxy, the effect of building the Death Star. Because why do, in the original Star Wars movie, 1977, Darth Vader and Tarkin activate the Death Star? They have an agenda to rule through fear. You see, the galaxy is incredibly fractious at this time. The Empire is relatively new in the grand scope of things. It's only been around for about a decade, and there are rebellions popping up throughout the galaxy, and they're having trouble, trying to play whack-a-mole and put them all out. And so they have this relatively reasonable idea through Tarkin that, well, we'll commit one targeted act of genocide and scare everybody into submission, and it will work, right? It's a really, really big galaxy. And so they think that this will work. But Leia knows something that they don't, and it's something that all of you know as well. She says to Tarkin, the more you tighten your grip, the more star systems are going to slip through your fingers. Yes, more control does not always mean more order. It's like plugging the top of a volcano. The pressure is just gonna burst out somewhere else, always. But I didn't even start learning about liberty in the original movie. I was kind of too young when I was watching those to kind of take in some of those ideas. It was in, of course, the Star Wars prequels, where I was learning about these ideas and thinking about them a little bit more deeply. There's episode 2. I was pretty much the same age because they were coming out at the same time as the Lord of the Rings films. Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, comes out. And there is this scene in the film. If you haven't seen the movie, yeah, exactly. You know the meme if you haven't seen the movie. There's this wonderful scene where Anakin Skywalker, the boy who's going to become Darth Vader, is on a date with his crush, Padme Amidala, a senator. Anakin doesn't like politics. Padme loves it. And she's poking fun at him, and she says, all right, fine, describe the kind of system that you would want, Mr. Smart Guy. I'm going to do this whole scene for you. And he says, I want a system where the politicians get together and discuss what's in the best interest of the people, and then they do it. She says, that's what we do. The problem is that people don't always agree. Well, then they should be made to, is what he says. And he has a little grin. It's very nice. And she goes, Who's gonna make them? You? No, not me. Someone wise. Sounds an awful lot like a dictatorship to me. Anyone wanna know what he says in response? Anyone got it? Well, if it works. I love that line because I think it's actually incredibly honest. It's George Lucas telling us, I think, something more true than most people will tell you about human nature and the people who we are neighbors with. It's that a lot of people really do think this way. Raise your hand if you know somebody who is a if it works person. There's somebody in your family. I'm raising my hand because if I wake up in a bad mood and I don't like what I saw on the news, I feel this way. I don't always have that totalitarian instinct in check. It's really, really hard. Let's see what we got. And so, if you don't know Star Wars, though, you might have watched this channel called Jubilee. I know it's really popular with younger kids these days, but the Jubilee YouTube channel, they have these debates. And recently, they put 3 capitalists against 3 communists. And Hannah Cox was in the debate. She's a wonderful advocate for liberty, who's been to LibertyCon many times. And then in the middle, we have our communist, this sweet, dainty, kind girl, right? She just seems like a nice person. She goes, I believe that communism could still work. And then, the kicker, people just need to be taught. She said, if we could just teach people to embrace the vision, right, behind it. I mean, that's the same guiding idea as then they should be made to. It's kind of shocking in its similarity. So if you're wondering, who is this guy and like, why is he up here talking about this stuff? Because it's kind of niche. It's just to remind you that you can talk to people about our ideas through more than political theory. I admire the instinct to share Smith and Hayek and Rand with people. I think it's great. But people are really drawn to story and narrative and plot and big character decisions. That's why Atlas Shrugged is so popular, right? Because it is fiction. There are other ways to communicate many of our ideas with people and to get them invested in these stories. Because I have to tell you, when you're trying to persuade people, I believe that what we are selling is not really that sexy. Freedom is a thing that you go for once you've lost it. But when you have some freedom, what you really want is some kind of stability. And our opponents, at least in American politics, Republicans and Democrats, those kids at those college meetings that I was going to, what they're selling is sexy. They're selling legislation. They're selling control. They're selling regulations over things that scare you. And we are selling the idea that the Hobbit should travel all the way across Mordor with the ring, nearly get killed a bunch of times, and struggle, and probably have fewer friends than if they would just join a side in the battle between one side and the other. It's actually a really, really hard journey that we're investing in and asking people to go on with us. And you know this, like when our opponents are out there talking to people, they are selling them the idea that through us, eventually things will be okay and a little bit more calm. And it kind of takes me back to the Death Star a little bit because again, taking the ring, wielding the Death Star against people that we don't like or ideas that we don't like is just a lot easier. It's a lot more simple. But we know that it doesn't work. And that's what makes us different. We know that when the Empire uses the Death Star against Alderaan, it actually makes the rebellion stronger than it ever was before. You see this particularly like in the Rogue One movie. You have factions of the rebellion. They can't unite around how to fight against the fascism of that empire. And so they blow up this planet, and now the rebellion's like, this is a life or death situation. We're going to die and lose all of our freedom unless we stand up, and they unite. More people join the rebellion. More people fight back. And you know this to be true, like when people win elections, when they finally get control of the bureaucracy, when they're finally able to enact their control freak and fund police tendencies and force ideas and legislation down on people, shove it down their throats, there's a backlash. It might take a while, but there will always be a backlash. And freedom demands that there be a backlash. And we generally just try to avoid that situation altogether by letting people live the lives that they would like to live. What you learn from stories like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings is that the desire for control is incredibly natural. There are areas in your own private life, in mine, where you probably don't live out libertarian or liberal principles in every single way, because there are always instances where we can convince ourselves that a little bit more power would be beneficial. But I ask you just to remember, as you leave this conference and go back to your lives, that while you may have plans for power, it always has plans for you too. And so what are you going to do with that? Take the ring. I propose you give it away. Thank you.